You've walked away. You know you have. You ended it. You said never again. And then, somehow, 6 months later, a year later, you're sitting across from someone who feels different, sounds different, even looks different. And within 3 months, you're right back in the same hell. Different face, same destruction, different voice, same patterns, same fights, same wounds, same feeling that you are somehow the problem. You've asked yourself why. You've prayed. You've fasted. You've believed for something different. And it keeps happening. I'm going to tell you something nobody in your church will say to your face. This is not a coincidence. This is not bad luck. This is not a character flaw. There is an assignment running in your relational field, and it has been operating since before you chose that person. It chose you. Or rather, and something built it to make sure that you would choose each other, over and over, until the assignment was dismantled. I know how these assignments were built, because I built them. My name's Danny. I grew up in a rural area, maybe 3,000 people. Dad left when I was 11, never came back. Mom did everything she could, 2 jobs, sometimes 3. By 15, I was running with a different kind of crowd. Heavy metal scene, older guys who had an explanation for everything, a framework, a sense of power I'd never felt in that small rural town where nothing meant anything and nobody was going anywhere. What I didn't understand then, what I only understood years later, sitting in a living room with a pastor who was walking me through what I'd come out of, was that I had been a perfect target. Kid with a wound that was never named, a hole where a father was supposed to be, a hunger for belonging so deep that the first group that offered it in real terms was going to get me. It didn't matter what they were. It mattered that they said, "You're one of us." That's how the inheritance trap works when it's used in recruitment. Before they ever brought me in, I already had the frequency running. I was already broadcasting, and the organization knew how to read that signal. It took me 6 months to understand what I had actually joined. 17 years later, I walked out of that organization. 180 Christian families. That's how many relational assignments I had a hand in building or maintaining over those 17 years. Tonight, I'm going to break down exactly how relational assignments work, how we inserted them, why they make you keep attracting the same type of person, and the specific steps to shut them down permanently. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you, that this is the thing our leadership never wanted to get out. Here's something I need you to hear before I get into the mechanics. By the end of this, I'm going to tell you about a specific case that made my handler, 31 years in the organization, go completely silent. I had never seen that man without an answer, not in 11 years of working under him. But after what I reported from this particular target, total silence, 15 seconds of it, and then 2 words. I'll get to it. But you need the foundation first, or it won't land the way it needs to. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning is the one place most people never go. The first thing you need to understand is this: relational assignments don't target you alone. They target your frequency. Let me explain what I mean by that. Every person carries something the organization called a relational signature. It's not mystical language. It's a practical concept we used in training. It describes the spiritual and emotional pattern a person emits in relationships. Think of it like a radio frequency. You broadcast something, and what you broadcast determines what picks up on it. Now here's the part that most people get wrong. Your relational signature isn't primarily about what you want. It's about what you were handed, what you were given in childhood before you had words for it, the wounds that never got addressed, the vows you made without knowing you were making them, the agreements you entered into because of what happened in your home before you were old enough to choose. An unhealed wound broadcasts on a specific frequency. And certain types of people, certain types of spirits, are tuned exactly to that frequency. When I was active in the organization, we had a name for this. We called it the inheritance trap. What it meant was simple. If we could identify the wounds a Christian carried from their family of origin, we could identify the exact type of person who would feel like home to them, and also destroy them. We weren't sending broken people into your life at random. We were sending people who matched your wound. And when someone matches your wound, something in you recognizes them. It feels like connection. It feels like understanding. It feels, God forgive me for saying this, like love. It isn't. It's a mirror built by an assignment. Let me tell you about a woman I'll call Sharon. She was 43, a worship leader at her church, raised in a home where her father was emotionally unavailable, present in body, absent in every way that mattered. He never affirmed her, never named what was valuable in her. She spent her childhood trying to earn his attention and never getting it. Sharon had been married twice by the time we identified her. Both husbands had been emotionally unavailable, not abusive, not openly destructive, just fundamentally unreachable. And she kept choosing them. Her church community said she had a pattern of falling for the wrong type of man. What they didn't know was that the pattern wasn't random. The assignment we ran against Sharon was specifically designed to keep presenting her with emotionally unavailable men who showed just enough interest to activate hope. And then withdrew. Every single time. The mechanism was simple and brutal. We identified her wound, the absent father, the unearned approval, the belief she had to perform to receive love. Then we inserted what the organization called a frequency beacon into her relational field. I'm not going to get into the specifics of how that's done. That's not something I'm putting out publicly. What I will tell you is what it did. It functioned like a filter. It made Sharon selectively attractive to a very specific type of man, men who carried a particular spirit of emotional withholding. And it made those men selectively drawn to her. She wasn't seeing the same man over and over. She was seeing 100 different men with one spirit, and that spirit was assigned to her wound. I placed this assignment on Sharon after 18 months of preparation. I had documented her relational history, her family background, her prayer patterns, her most vulnerable moments of hope. The assignment was custom-built. It was not a generic curse. It was a surgical insertion designed to function in the gaps of her healing. Sharon prayed. Sharon believed. Sharon did everything right in the natural. And for 7 years, the pattern continued. Not because she was broken, because there was something working against her that she didn't know existed. She's free now. I'll tell you how that happened later. But I need you to understand that what was running against Sharon, that exact same mechanism, that exact same type of assignment, is running against far more believers than the church is prepared to acknowledge. And most of them will never know. Because nobody talks about this, I'm talking about it. Now, before I get into the second mechanism, and this one is heavier, I want to be upfront about that, I need to pause here. Because what I just described, the inheritance trap, the frequency beacon, the custom-built surgical assignment against Sharon's wound, that's not the full picture. There are layers underneath what I just told you. And those layers are exactly why some of you have prayed for years and still haven't broken free. The full protocol for identifying and dismantling a relational assignment is documented in a resource called Destroying Assignments, the 14-day deliverance protocol. This isn't something I created. This was assembled by believers who understood the mechanics I'm describing, people who took insider intelligence like what I've shared here and turned it into a practical day-by-day system. I want to be direct with you. I spent 17 years building the thing this protocol is designed to destroy. When someone showed it to me after I came out of the organization, I sat with it for 3 days, went through every section. The reason I refer people to it, the only reason, is because it addresses the actual mechanics, not just the surface symptoms. Let me name what I'm talking about, because I've been watching people in the comments describe their lives. You've been in one painful relationship after another. You can't figure out why you keep choosing the same type of person when you can see clearly that it's wrong. You've started to wonder if you're the problem, if something in you is fundamentally broken. You've prayed for a godly relationship and watched it collapse within months. You've watched people around you build stable, healthy, loving marriages, while yours dissolve for reasons you can't explain. You've done the counseling, you've read the books, and something is still blocking the breakthrough. That's not a character issue, that's an active assignment, and it has a mechanism, and the mechanism can be dismantled. The protocol goes through 14 days of specific identification and declaration work, day by day, assignment by assignment. It starts with your relational history and works backward through the exact access points the enemy used to build the pattern you're living in. It identifies the frequency your wounds are broadcasting and shows you how to change the signal. You need this. I know that sounds direct. But I also know what these assignments do to people over time. They don't just destroy relationships. They destroy the belief that a different life is possible. And that's the real target. The link is in the description. Click it, read it, decide. Now. Second mechanism. We called it the covenant trap. And this one is going to make you uncomfortable, because it means that some of the connections you experienced as the most spiritually significant, the most powerful, the ones that felt ordained, were manufactured. Here's what the covenant trap is. In the organization, we understood something about how Christians form bonds. When a believer experiences a deep emotional or spiritual connection with someone in a moment of vulnerability, a kind of covenant gets formed. Not a formal covenant, not a legal commitment, a spiritual one, a thread. And that thread doesn't automatically break when the relationship ends. We exploited this. Specifically, here's how it worked in practice. We would identify a Christian who was in a season of spiritual searching, usually after a loss or a crisis of faith. Then we would insert a specific type of person into their environment, someone who spoke the same spiritual language, who seemed to understand their calling, who validated their gifts, who made them feel seen and chosen and significant. This was not an accident. The person inserted was specifically selected, or in some cases spiritually influenced, to create a covenant moment, a moment of such depth that the Christian would form a bond that they believed was from God. And then we would activate the destruction. Because here's what most people don't understand about a covenant, even an illegitimate one. Breaking the surface relationship does not break the covenant thread. You can end the marriage, you can block the number, you can move across the country, and the thread remains. And that thread becomes the channel through which the pattern runs into the next relationship, and the next, and the next. I want you to hear me clearly on this. When you find yourself inexplicably drawn to the same type of person, even after you've done everything to change your patterns, this is often why. There is a covenant thread still attached, and until that thread is severed by specific spiritual authority, the frequency keeps running. Let me tell you about a man I'll call Marcus. He was 47, pastor of a small congregation, had been through 2 divorces. Both marriages had ended in the same way. His wife had become emotionally detached and eventually left without a complete explanation either time. Marcus was convinced he had done something wrong. He had submitted to accountability, gone to counseling, done years of inner work. He couldn't find the source. What he didn't know was that the first person he had believed was his God-ordained partner, a woman he had met at a conference 22 years earlier, who had broken off the relationship after 6 weeks. That woman had been the point of insertion. The relationship had lasted 6 weeks. The covenant thread had lasted 22 years. Every woman Marcus formed a deep bond with after that was being filtered through that thread. And the spirit attached to that thread carried one specific assignment: reproduce the pattern of emotional detachment and abandonment that Marcus had internalized from his father. The assignment used the covenant thread as its access channel. When the thread was finally identified and severed, Marcus didn't instantly have a perfect relationship. But for the first time in 20 years, he stopped attracting the same spirit. He could actually see people clearly when he met them. The filter was gone. I want you to think about who that person was for you. You probably already have a name in your mind, the one that felt different from everything else, the one you built something on, even briefly, even if it didn't last, the one that left a mark nobody else knows about. That relationship may still be carrying a thread that is influencing everything you've stepped into since. The thread doesn't care that you've moved on. It doesn't care that you've grown. It runs on a spiritual frequency, and until that frequency is interrupted by specific authority, it keeps transmitting. Now, if you've been living in this cycle, same spirit, different faces, same pattern, I want you to participate in something right now. Write in the comments, "I break every illegitimate covenant thread in Jesus' name." Write it out. When you declare it in public, when believers all over the world write the same declaration at the same time, something shifts in the spirit realm. Participate now. Take 10 seconds. Write it. Third mechanism. This is the one that kept me up at night, even when I was still in the organization. We called it the familiar spirit loop, and I need you to understand that this one runs specifically against people who have been praying for years, people who have done the work, people who have fasted, declared, believed. If you're serious about your faith and still can't figure out why this keeps happening, this mechanism might be exactly what's running against you. Here's what a familiar spirit does in the context of relational assignments. A familiar spirit is not a ghost. It's not a generic demon. In the way the organization used the term, a familiar spirit is an entity that has accumulated specific, detailed intelligence about a believer, their history, their patterns, their greatest moments of hope and their deepest disappointments, their specific vulnerabilities in relationships, their prayer language, their prophetic words, everything. And a familiar spirit uses that intelligence to simulate what the believer has been praying for. I'm going to say that again. A familiar spirit can study what you have been believing God for, in prayer, in your journals, in your declarations, and it can present a counterfeit version of that exact thing. A person who matches the description of your prayers, someone who checks every box you've written down, who feels like the answer you've been waiting for. And they are not. They are a simulation, built from your own prayers. This is what made the familiar spirit loop the most dangerous assignment in our relational toolkit, because the believer doesn't just feel hope, they feel confirmation. They feel like God is answering. They feel grateful. They feel like they should stop questioning and just receive, and they walk straight into the assignment. Before I tell you about the case that silenced my handler, I need you to understand how the familiar spirit gathered its intelligence, because this part is what most people never hear. In the organization, we had what we called documentation protocols. Before a familiar spirit was assigned to a target, there was a period of observation. It varied, sometimes 6 months, sometimes 2 years. During that period, the familiar spirit was gathering specific data. What did the target pray? In what language? What were the specific words they used when they prayed about relationships? What prophetic words had been spoken over them that they held on to? What did their journals say? What did they confide to trusted friends? What was the shape of their hope? All of that intelligence was fed into the familiar spirit. And then that spirit was tasked with presenting a human being who matched the profile with a level of accuracy that should not have been possible without supernatural information. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The reason someone felt like the answer to your prayers, the reason they were so specific, so exact, so uncannily right, may not have been confirmation. It may have been surveillance. That is a hard thing to hear. I know that. Some of you are sitting with a relationship right now that you still believe was from God, even though it ended in destruction. I'm not here to tell you what to do with that. I'm here to tell you that the mechanism exists, and knowing the mechanism is what makes you able to close the door. Now I need to tell you about the case that made my handler go quiet. I was 34. 11 years into the organization, I had been assigned a woman I'll call Christine. She was 39. A prayer warrior in a Pentecostal church, deeply serious about her faith. She had been single for 12 years and had prayed specifically, consistently, with extraordinary detail about what she was believing God for in a husband. She had kept journals. She had received prophetic words. She knew exactly what she was asking for. We built a familiar spirit loop against Christine that was, by the standards of the organization, technically exceptional. We studied her for 8 months before insertion. The man we used as the point of insertion, I'll call him a carrier, he was not aware of what he was being used for. He genuinely believed he was pursuing Christine out of his own heart. What he did not know was that a familiar spirit had been working on him for months, shaping his presentation, his words, his instincts with Christine, to match her prayers with an accuracy that I still find disturbing to think about. Christine experienced him as the answer to 12 years of prayer. The confirmation she felt was overwhelming. She moved quickly. She wasn't being naive. She was a discerning woman. The problem was that what was presenting itself had been specifically designed to pass her discernment. They were married 11 months after meeting. The assignment activated on their second anniversary. I reported this case because of what happened when we tried to escalate the assignment in year 3. I went in to reinforce the familiar spirit loop and found that something had changed in Christine's spiritual environment. There was something present in that household that I could not categorize. It wasn't a prayer language, it wasn't a declaration. It was, and I'm using the best language I have for this, it was a presence of intercession that I had not seen documented before, consistent, specific, authoritative. It was coming from Christine's mother, who lived 2 states away and who had apparently been praying for her daughter's marriage every single morning since the wedding. Not generic prayer. Specific, targeted, authoritative intercession that was building a protection over that household that the familiar spirit could not penetrate. I reported this to my handler, 31 years in the organization. He went completely silent. 15 seconds of silence on a connection where silence meant something had happened that he could not explain. He said, "Close it." 2 words. And he never spoke about that assignment again. What Christine's mother was doing should not have been able to stop what we had built. What I came to understand afterward, years later after I left, is that there is a level of intercession, of persistent, specific, named, targeted prayer for another person's relational life that creates a coverage the enemy genuinely cannot penetrate. Not because the prayer is magic, because the authority behind it, when exercised with that level of consistency and specificity, is greater than any assignment that can be built. Christine's marriage isn't perfect, but it's still standing, and the familiar spirit loop never completed. Before I go any further into how to fight this, I have to be straight with you about something. YouTube shut us down. Monetization, memberships, donations, gone. They did it to this channel, and to thousands of others that were exposing what the enemy doesn't want exposed. I know what a silencing assignment looks like. I spent 17 years helping build them. This is one, but we are not leaving. This channel is staying right here and we are going to keep posting. More of it, not less. But we also set up a private community on Patreon for what we cannot do on this platform. No algorithm gets to decide when this work stops. As a witness, you get exclusive spiritual warfare content, real confessions, strategic polls, discussions that go deeper than what YouTube allows. As a confessor, you get everything in the witness plus a monthly personal consultation where we identify the specific assignments against your relational life, build your exact case, and deliver the steps to destroy it as a personalized document. If you used to support this channel through memberships or donations, you can continue that inside Patreon. The enemy took that from YouTube. He does not get to take it from a community he cannot touch. The link is in the description. Do not wait. The enemy does not wait now. The countermeasures. Because understanding how these assignments work is only half of what tonight is about. The other half is this. How do you shut them down permanently? I want to be clear about what I mean when I say permanently. I don't mean the enemy never tries again. I mean the access point is closed, the frequency is changed, the covenant thread is severed. The familiar spirit loses its intelligence because the landscape it was mapping no longer exists. That's what permanently means. And it is achievable. I've seen it happen. First countermeasure. You have to identify the original wound, and specifically the vow it produced. Not describe it, identify it. There's a difference. Describing a wound sounds like, "My father was emotionally unavailable." Identifying it sounds like, "I made a specific vow at age 9 that I would never ask for love again, because asking for it always ended in rejection." That vow is the access point. That's the thing that opened the door. Every relational assignment has an access point in the target's history. Always. We never built an assignment without first locating the crack in the foundation. The wound itself isn't the access point. It's the agreement the wound produced. The vow. The conclusion you came to about yourself, about relationships, about what love looks like and what you deserve. As long as that agreement is in place, the frequency is broadcasting, and the assignment will keep sending signals back to it. This is why well-intentioned advice, choose better, heal yourself, raise your standards, doesn't break the assignment, because the agreement isn't conscious. You can raise your standards in your thinking and still be broadcasting a different signal entirely from your unhealed wound. The assignment doesn't care what you think. It responds to what you emit. In the organization, we were trained to look for 3 categories of vow in a target. The first was the vow against receiving, usually formed in a home where love was conditional or absent. The internal agreement: I will not need anyone. I don't deserve to be chosen. If someone stays, there is something wrong with them for choosing me. That vow makes a person unconsciously sabotage every stable relationship while being drawn to unstable ones, because instability confirms what they already believe. The second category was the vow of responsibility, usually formed in a home where a child had to manage a parent's emotional state. The internal agreement: it is my job to make this person okay. If they are suffering, it is my failure. That vow makes a person compulsively drawn to people who need to be fixed, rescued, or managed, because being needed is the only relational context where they feel secure. The third was the vow of worthiness through performance, usually formed in a religious or achievement-focused home. The internal agreement: I am loved only when I produce. My value is contingent on what I deliver. That vow makes a person unable to receive love that is simply given, without a transaction. So they consistently end up in relationships where love is earned, withheld, and conditional. Here is the part that makes vows so effective as access points. They don't feel like vows. They feel like observations. They feel like things you simply know to be true about yourself. I am someone who doesn't deserve to be chosen. I am someone who has to manage the people around them. I am someone whose value is in what I produce. These feel like accurate self-knowledge. They feel like wisdom. They don't feel like agreements. They don't feel like something that was decided and can be undecided, but they are. They were decided at a specific moment by a specific version of you who had no other option, and they can be revoked, not through willpower or positive thinking, through specific authoritative named renunciation in the name of the one who has the authority to overwrite any agreement the enemy has used against you. One of these 3 vows was present in almost every target I ever worked with. Some had 2 of them. A few had all 3. When all 3 were present simultaneously, the assignment ran almost without maintenance. We barely had to intervene. The target maintained the pattern on their own, filtering out healthy connection before it even had a chance to develop, drawn compulsively toward the exact spirit assigned to confirm every vow they were carrying. And here's the thing I need you to understand. These vows are not your fault. They were formed before you had the capacity to choose differently. They were the only conclusion available to you at the time you made them, but they are still running, and they are still broadcasting. And until they are explicitly renounced by name in authority, they remain active access points. Second countermeasure: you have to annul the covenant threads. This is different from forgiveness. You may have forgiven every person in your relational history and still have active covenant threads running. Forgiveness releases offense. Annulment removes a spiritual legal tie. The declaration required for annulment is specific. It has to name the person, not publicly, in your private prayer. It has to name the covenant that was formed, even if that covenant was never formal. It has to invoke the authority of the blood of Jesus over the specific connection. Not generic prayer over relationships, but targeted, named, specific annulment of a specific thread. This is not something you do once and forget. For significant covenant threads, the ones formed in moments of deep emotional vulnerability, the annulment prayer is a repeated declaration. You continue it until you feel the thread release. Some people report that happening in a single session, others need weeks. The key is specificity and persistence. I want you to participate here. If you know who the person is, if you can name them right now in your mind, the person who formed the deepest covenant, the one you believe is the root of the pattern, write this in the comments right now. I annul every illegitimate covenant formed against my destiny in Jesus' name. Write it. Put it in writing. When you declare in public what you're cutting, it carries a different authority than a private prayer. Participate now. Third countermeasure: you have to change the frequency actively, not passively. This is where the work is. Passive healing, therapy, rest, time, addresses the symptoms of a wound, but doesn't necessarily change the broadcast. What changes the broadcast is active declaration, specific, daily targeted declaration over the relational field of your life, not generic prayer, not "Lord, bless my relationships." The declaration has to be specific enough that if the enemy were listening, he'd know exactly which part of his assignment you're targeting. I'll give you an example. If the inheritance trap in your life was built on the wound of emotional abandonment, the declaration that changes the frequency sounds something like this. I declare that I am not abandoned. I declare that the spirit of abandonment has no legal access to my relational field. I close every door that was opened through the vow I made against receiving love. I am loved, I am chosen, and what I broadcast now is the signal of a whole person. That declaration, repeated daily for a sustained period, does not just change your psychology, it changes your spiritual frequency. And when the frequency changes, the assignment loses traction. The filter dissolves. The kind of person the assignment was designed to attract to you begins to find you uninteresting. Simultaneously, the kind of person you were built to connect with can actually find you, because now you're broadcasting on a frequency they can receive. The fourth countermeasure, and this one is the one most people skip, you have to get covered. What Christine's mother did, that consistent, specific, authoritative intercession over a household, is not something that happens by accident. You have to have people in your life who are praying specifically for your relational protection. Not people who say they're praying for you. People who are naming your situation, your history, your specific vulnerabilities before God every morning. The organization knew who was covered and who wasn't. It was part of our targeting intelligence. A believer with consistent, specific intercessory coverage was a harder target. Not impenetrable, but harder, significantly harder. Some targets we identified early as covered and simply moved on. The assignment was not worth the resistance. Coverage changes the spiritual landscape of your relational field. It doesn't just add protection, it creates an environment where familiar spirits lose accuracy. Because the field they were mapping is being actively managed by authority that outranks them. If you don't have that kind of coverage in your life, find it, ask for it, build it. Tell one person who prays with authority, I need you to pray for my relational protection, specifically, by name, regularly. That conversation is one of the most strategically significant things you can do. I'm not overstating this. I watched assignments fail specifically because of intercessory coverage, from people the target didn't even know were praying. Now let me tell you what happened with Sharon, the worship leader I mentioned at the beginning. 7 years into the relational assignment against her, 7 years of the same pattern, she had started to believe that this was simply her lot, that she was someone who attracted unavailability, and that was the shape of her life. She had stopped asking God for a different outcome, not because she stopped believing in God, but because she had stopped believing that a different outcome was possible for her specifically. That moment of resignation, that was actually the thing that almost made the assignment complete. Because the final stage of a relational assignment is not more pain, it's not more bad relationships, it's the target accepting that this is who they are. That's the seal. Once that belief locks in, the assignment doesn't have to keep working. The target maintains it themselves. Sharon was 3 months from that seal locking in when something interrupted it. A woman she barely knew, an older woman who had been in the church for decades, came up to her after a service and said, I have been praying for you for 2 years. I don't know everything you're carrying, but I know you're fighting something in the relational area of your life, and I want to ask your permission to pray for you specifically, every morning, by name. About this, Sharon almost said no. She had learned not to let people into that part of her life, but something in her said yes. 3 months later, the pattern broke for the first time in 7 years, not because Sharon did anything dramatically different, because the intercessory coverage created an environment where the familiar spirit lost traction, the frequency began to shift, and the next person who came into Sharon's life did not carry that spirit. For the first time in 7 years, what showed up was something real. That older woman never knew what she had done. She just prayed, specifically, consistently, by name, every morning. That was all it took to dismantle something I had spent 18 months building. I've never been more humbled by anything in my entire life, and I was still in the organization when I learned it. Now I want to bring all of this together. The inheritance trap. The vow you made before you had words for it, broadcasting on a frequency that draws the same wound, dressed in different faces. The covenant trap. The thread still attached to a connection that ended years ago, running its assignment through every relationship you've entered since. The familiar spirit loop. The intelligence gathered from your own prayers, used to simulate the answer to those prayers, bypassing your discernment because it was designed to do exactly that. 3 mechanisms. 1 goal. To keep you cycling in pain until you accept the lie that this is who you are and this is what your relational life was always going to look like. I'm telling you tonight that it is a lie. It was designed to be believed. It was built to feel like truth. But it is a lie. And the countermeasures are just as precise as the assignments themselves. Identify the vow, annul the threads, change the frequency, get covered. These are not suggestions. These are operational steps. And they work because the assignment requires access, and access requires an open door. Every countermeasure closes a door, and when the doors are closed, the assignment loses its architecture. It has nowhere to run. Let me pray for you before I go. Because knowledge is only part of what you need. There is something that happens when authority is spoken over a person who has just received this kind of information, something I cannot fully explain but have witnessed, that activates what the knowledge pointed to. So stay with me. Father, I bring before you everyone watching this right now. I know some of them have been in this pattern for years. I know some of them are carrying wounds they've never told anyone about. I know some of them have a name in their mind right now, the person who was the beginning of the pattern, and they've been carrying the weight of that for longer than anyone around them knows. I break right now, in the authority of Jesus, every relational assignment against everyone hearing this. I break the inheritance trap. I call out the vows formed in childhood, the vow against receiving, the vow of endless responsibility, the vow of conditional worthiness, and I declare them annulled, revoked, stripped of their authority by the blood that was shed for exactly this kind of freedom. I break every covenant thread still running. I speak to the access channels still active, and I declare them closed. By name, by history, by every illegitimate bond that formed in a moment of manufactured depth, I declare those threads severed, completely, in Jesus' name. I break the familiar spirit loops. I declare that the intelligence gathered from the prayers of every person watching this is now useless. Because the landscape the enemy was mapping is being replaced. The wounds that were the source of that intelligence are being healed. The frequency is changing right now. And what they broadcast going forward is the signal of a whole person, covered by blood under authority. I declare that intercessory coverage rises up for everyone hearing this prayer. I ask that someone in each of their lives would be prompted, tonight, this week, to pray for their relational protection specifically by name consistently. That the kind of coverage Christine's mother gave is extended to everyone watching. And I declare that the next thing that walks toward them is not an assignment. I declare that they will see clearly, that what comes next is real, and that the pattern, the one they've carried for years, the one they've been ashamed of, the one they've prayed about 100 times, that pattern stops. Not someday, now, in Jesus' name. Amen. My name's Danny. I grew up in a rural area, 3,000 people, a dad who left at 11 and a mom who stayed and worked herself to the ground for kids she loved more than we ever understood. I found the wrong kind of family when I was 15 and spent 17 years doing things I can't take back. I built assignments against people who were praying for the exact things I was designed to destroy. But God, He pulled me out. He washed me clean. And I spent the first 3 years after I left, not knowing what to do with what I knew. Then I figured it out. You tell it, all of it, because every person who understands how these assignments work is one less person they can run them against. If you want to participate one more time before you go, write one word in the comments, one word describing what you're believing God for in your relational life. Restored, whole, chosen, covered. Whatever that word is for you, write it. Declare it. Let it be witnessed. Something shifts when the declaration goes public. From the pit to the cross. See you in the next one.